This is Women Talking Mitzvot, brought to you by Deracheha and the Stella K. Abraham Migdal Oz Women's Beit Midrash as part of their commitment to bringing women's spiritual worlds into halachic discourse. This entire podcast series has been graciously sponsored by Sigal and Zach in honor of Women's Talmud Torah, Women's Halacha Study, and in merit of Am Yisrael. All of these episodes draw on the rich sources and discussions of women and mitzvot on Deracheha.org. Today's episode discusses the halachic issues relating to applying makeup and other cosmetic products on Shabbat. This topic has direct impact on the lives of so many women and touches on sensitive issues such as body image and communal norms of beauty.
Hi, Yosefa.
Hi, Shayna.
So today's topic is makeup, and honestly, I'm not quite sure what I was thinking when I thought that maybe this would be a lighter topic. Maybe because I thought makeup sounds fun to talk about. But I very quickly realized that any area of halacha that hits up against something that's more personal for us, and especially something that ties into the way that we perceive and experience ourselves and the way that we present ourselves to others, is going to be pretty sensitive and maybe even more challenging to discuss. I also know that for some people, makeup conjures up more negative associations. It makes them think about things that are superficial or a certain element, maybe even of deception or artificiality. And I totally get that. But when I was thinking about myself and what I think about makeup, I think for me, the way that I, come to it is more like the way that I think about clothing as a tool that we have at our disposal that could help us feel good about how we look. It could raise our spirits. It could even sometimes add an extra touch to a special occasion. Not that I'm a big makeup person at all. You know me. I'm not somebody that wears a lot of makeup. I don't even put on makeup every day. But when I'm getting dressed up for something special, any kinds of occasion, and that could be a wedding, it could be a speaking engagement, it could be a podcast. So when I'm getting dressed up, I put on makeup. So I think for me, that's what makeup represents. It represents getting dressed up to the point that if I come downstairs in my house in makeup, inevitably one of my kids is going to be like, Ima, where are you going? What do you have? What's going on? Right away, they read it on me. And I think that's why on Shabbat, when I'm all dressed up, but I'm not wearing makeup, something feels funny, something feels off to me. If on Shabbat I was wearing, a jean skirt and a sweatshirt, I don't think I would feel like that. But because on Shabbat we get dressed up as a way of showing kavod, as a way of showing respect to Shabbat, it feels strange to not have makeup on. And I'm curious, if that resonates for you. I want to look my best on Shabbat, and I think that's why there's a real challenge here for me.
Yeah, so I definitely identify with the idea of being dressed up, or we used to say in my home, being put together. That was the phrase we used. Because being put together, you can be put together when you're looking sporty, and you could be put together when you're looking, to go to shul. Right. And so I like the putting together piece. I'll also just say on a personal level, my approach to makeup is also really minimal. Also because I don't like things that take so much time, but also because, and it goes back to the artificiality, I have a real, I would say almost a fear is a strong word, but a distaste for one day waking up and feeling like I look nice, and the next day feeling like I lost that kind of allure. And so that plays in for me with a lot of things about how fancy I'll go or the makeup
and
piece.
You want something more natural.
I want something more natural because I don't want to feel that if it's not there, then I'm a less version of myself. It's a real thing for me.
Yeah, and the lack of patience. I wasn't thinking about that, but that's definitely an issue for me also.
I mean, how hard it is for me to get places on time routine to begin with. So if I'm putting in a whole makeup routine. Anyway, so that for me is a big piece. I'll also say that as we were preparing for this episode, and I took this really, really seriously because it's a very serious topic, and we'll talk sort of more about that why and how it's sort of played even more of a role in the past few years for me, I think. But I think that the stakes were also pretty high because I kind of wanted to figure out a way that this could have its way somehow in a Shabbat in a way that would be in a permissible fashion. And that for me was important to sort of see the sources and feel that this is rooted in also my beliefs and also to be able to feel comfortable and presentable. So for me, this was actually really important, and I'll even say a little bit redeeming as we go. We'll see. As we go forward, we'll see in the conversation to really go deeper into these topics. I think I also wanted to just start this conversation by remembering that it's a really, really natural, universal desire for women to want to care about their appearance. And this is something that definitely is in our world since the dawn of civilization. And I'll even just say that even those of us who have anecdotally raised little girls, we could see how there is often an attention to the way they look. Sometimes it reflects itself in criticism at a really young age. And I would even say I've had an experience doing this even when there's literally no TV influence, that there's something naturally in there that little girls do look at themselves more. The layer that's added later in life about attraction to men or noticing the world around you, I really think, again, I'm just saying this anecdotally, I feel like it's an additional layer, but it's not even the initial one.
Yeah.
So there's something here that's definitely very natural and innate to who we are.
Each one in their own way. There's obviously a spectrum. Some girls curl less, care more, but absolutely.
Totally. And I think that we see that by the fact that makeup specifically has such a rich history in the world. I mean, even if we just look first even at Tanakh, even though I want to go back to earlier civilizations in a moment, but if we look at Tanakh, the main reference we have to makeup is actually eye makeup, right? It's called kol. And so we have, or puch is another way it's phrased. We have Izevel in a very, very negative example in the book of Melachim Bet, where she puts on eye makeup before facing Yehu. And we have examples in the prophets in Yirmiyahu, ki tikri'i bepuch einayich. There, the makeup, putting on makeup is criticizing Yehuda for beautifying itself while destruction is right around the corner. And we have other prophets who mention this, but it's specifically eye makeup in those cases, which I think is also interesting. And if we go back, of course, to ancient Egypt, which predates those biblical references, then we know that actually mostly men, but also women in ancient Egypt were using eye makeup. It was a very central feature of how they presented. We even have our first evidence of handbags in which they clearly carried with them cosmetics, like the evening clutch actually originates in ancient Egypt, which is also fascinating. And of course, different cultures have different ideas about what is attractive. Maybe in ancient Egypt, it was thick eyeliner, whereas in different eras in ancient China, it was really, really white faces. Do you know what I'm saying? Like these ideas of what is attractive is different. And we also know that there was ancient nail polish. And what was fascinating as I was researching this topic is also to discover that a massive part of what went along with these ancient cosmetics was how far they were willing to go to create them. Because unlike what we have today, which is a much quicker production, I mean, they were using the blood of animals to make, it wasn't nail polish like we have today, it was more like a red stain. And in a lot of the ancient makeup, they were using leads. And of course, this created damage. And we have apparently Queen Elizabeth, that she had tremendous facial damage from the lead that was in her makeup to the point where she basically had to always be caked because it literally ate away at her skin. I mean, people went to great lengths. And this all, of course, changes very, very much. We see that both the materials start changing, but they change in accordance with the way that society becomes aware of the way it looks. So when photographs become more popular, I'm not talking about people are taking pictures 17 times a day, but even when they're having a picture taken as opposed to moving into a portrait, right? A portrait, you sat there for a one-time sitting. But when photographs come onto the scene, people become aware of how they look. And that starts shifting this industry. And that also is a fascinating thing to think about. And while at the turn of the 20th century, cosmetics were originally really still at that point a stage element, and they would be used for stage. Stage makeup was also, since theater has been a thing, stage makeup has been a thing. But it went then to moving into movies. So when that became popular, and then as we move through the 20th century, it starts being used and accessible to all classes, both because they were able to produce makeup in a non-lethal and also a cheaper way, and because as people started being more aware of their image, the desire to look better increased. And of course, this shifted most dramatically with the ubiquitous use of mirrors, which we don't think about that so often, but also an invention of the past century. And so that totally shifted it. And I'll just say that the last piece really in our modern lives that's super relevant is, of course, the use of the selfie. And we already have data on this, on how the selfie has impacted the whole eyebrow trend that many of us see, right? The thick eyebrows has been influenced by the selfie revolution, and also all this technology to quote unquote improve the way people look or the way their image or the digital image improvements has also really jumped very much since the age of the selfie. And so that piece is really significant. And so of course there's a really, really wide range of how women relate to all these topics and specifically how they relate to the Shabbos piece. But I think that it's just important to put it like in historical context. It's not new. It's always been there, but in the past century, the use of this and the makeup industry has greatly increased. And it has, I think, like a 4.5% increase every single year.
Wow.
It's massive. I mean, multiply that by billions, you know what I mean?
Wow.
So this is a massive part of the modern world. And certainly it's going to impact us living in the modern world and within our halachic observance. So I'll just, in this part, I think this sort of like introductory thought, just remind us that there are different standards, right, in each community. And for every community, what is acceptable to go out, to go out looking like looks different in different places. And for some of us that serves us well, for some of us that serves us less well. But I guess we'll keep thinking about that as we go deeper into our conversation.
Yeah, it's a fine balance because, on the one hand, we're happy that these things exist and that we have this tool, as I referred to it earlier. We want women to be able to feel good about how they look. And on the other hand, we don't want them to feel pressured and we don't want them to feel like they have to meet certain expectations. And as you said, I really think that there's a wide range. I think for some women who are not into makeup at all, like this episode is going to be a total non-issue because they're not into makeup. So like makeup on Shabbat is just not something that is an issue in their lives. For others who use makeup in very specific ways, specifically when we have a woman who uses makeup to cover a scar or a birthmark that maybe bothers her or something else that she, feels uncomfortable with, there could be a very significant emotional and personal component to this conversation that I think it's important for us to be sensitive to. We're not just talking about like getting dressed up. Sometimes there's
totally.
a much more, a deeper need. And then there are also women who wear makeup mostly because of the social pressure, as you said, and not really because they want to. And those women, I think, would be so happy if our communities took a step back on Shabbat and embraced it as an opportunity to move away from those communal expectations. And on the other hand, there are women who feel like, what do you mean? Like I take real personal pleasure in wearing makeup and I find the prohibitions on Shabbat to be very restraining. And it could even be that some of those women are listening right now and thinking, maybe I want to turn this off.
Yeah, I don't really want to know what you have to say right
maybe
now.
I want to shut this off before I hear anything more. I'd rather not know. And I'll just say honestly that that's something that I can relate to because for a good while, I was really in that space of like, not wanting to know too much about this topic. I'll say that I always knew that you weren't supposed to really wear makeup on Shabbat, but I never learned the halachot inside. So like what I had heard is that you weren't supposed to smear things. Okay, so I didn't put on lipstick, and I didn't put on liquid foundation, but I remembered hearing that like powder, especially loose powder, is okay. And especially if you put the powder on the brush before Shabbat and then you're not like doing that action of like loosening the powder on Shabbat. So basically what I would do is every Friday be right before Shabbat, after I put on my makeup, on Erev Shabbat, I would take some like powder foundation and some powder blush and some powder bronzer and I would put it on the different brushes. And then when I would wake up in the morning, I would put it on. And I thought that was like, it's probably not the worst thing in the world now that I've done more research, but I also knew that like I had never really looked into it completely and I kind of left it like that. And then two things happened. Okay. One is that Deracheha put out their articles on this topic and in editing them and like reading through them, I was like, oh, there's a little bit more here to the story. And the second thing that was very significant is that a Bogeret, an alumna of Migdal happened to mention to me that after years of wearing makeup on Shabbat and like not really caring, she decided to make a real change and like, go, Derech HaMelech and do things in the halachically ideal way. And that like really hit me and really inspired me. And I was like, you know what, Sheena? I think it's time to stop. So I kind of like 1 week to the next, I was like, that's it. I kind of like stopped cold turkey, but I wasn't really happy because I didn't really love the way that I looked on Shabbat morning. But, I kind of like left it like that. So it took time really, and really over the last few weeks, especially around this episode, to get to like a better balance.
Totally. I'll just also say personally that I also went many years and I didn't really bother me so much. Like I didn't care so much that I wasn't wearing makeup. And I think that also as we start getting a little bit older, and then it starts being more sensitive. And for me, though, the real thing was that I started speaking more in Shabbatot. And I guess I'll say this again also later, but I think it's really, really important to be a na'im face of Torah. I really believe that. And it was uncomfortable for me a little bit. Again, not because there was such a massive difference. And, also without lipstick, it's kind of like very, very nuanced, at that point, how much it's impacting your look. But I started feeling less comfortable with it. And that started becoming a challenge for me, I would say like in the past year or so. So that was something that I also was avoided a little bit, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. But I'm happy that I'm dafka happy that we've looked into it, and I want to share that
very
relief.
Honest here.
I want to share that relief with the listeners. Don't worry, I think we're going to get to
and this is women talking mitzvot. If we're not going to be real and share, in an honest way, then what are we doing?
Totally. And I just want to connect this for a moment to our last episode. In the last episode, we discussed how meaningful and appealing it is for many Jews to do kiddush and fulfill some of the positive mitzvot of Shabbat and eat challah and have their meals together. And that sort of it's been caught on for a while, and it's a very big part of people's identity. But it's the prohibitions that surround applying makeup on Shabbat or other prohibitions, what we refrain from doing, that I think are the more challenging parts of Shabbat.
Yeah.
These are the parts that really test our will. And I think that we wanted to explore this one specifically because, as you said, it's not really so easy to talk about, and it's good to have an honest conversation about it. And also because we found, and I really tested this out, it's often very difficult to find good information about this in Hilchot Shabbat books, which is why the Deracheha articles are really, really helpful. But I looked in a whole bunch of them,
so did I.
And it wasn't helpful. And we'll talk.
There's a paragraph or two.
There's a paragraph, but it's not helpful.
So I think that is true, and that's why we're so happy that we have these articles, because they really go down to like the specific details and they get into the nitty-gritty, and that's what we need when it comes to something like this. Before we talk more about like the halachot and the different approaches and how we could think about this in good and healthy ways in terms of our lives, I want to take a step back and talk about why appearance even matters to us, because it is funny a little bit. It could feel superficial to be sitting here and discussing makeup. And yet our sources, they really don't shy away from talking about beauty. We know that the Tanakh often mentions people's physical appearance as part of their description. And this is true, by the way, both for women and for men. Like we see this, for example, by the Imahot, by the four matriarchs, by Yosef, by Shimshon, by David HaMelech, by Esther HaMalkah, by the male and female characters in Shir HaShirim. And I think that there's a real deep significance to this, because firstly, it also connects back to what we were discussing in our last episode on Kiddush, that the Torah does not deny that we live in a physical world, and the Torah teaches us to take physical things and to elevate them and to use them in positive ways. And physical beauty is a gift from Hashem, and it could be used obviously in corruptive, seductive, inappropriate ways, or it could be used in ways that are holy, that make us feel good about ourselves, that influence our actions, or that help us add some kind of extra level of meaning, that deepen relationships, especially the marital one, that honor other people at a wedding, for example, if we get dressed up, or that honor Shabbat. So I think physical beauty is a powerful force that shapes human behavior, and therefore the Torah doesn't ignore it. And I think that that's amazing that the Torah doesn't ignore it, and that there are even very specific halachot that relate to it. We also see an acknowledgement in all different kinds of areas of halacha that are connected to beauty and to things related to that. So we'll see that a husband has an obligation to provide his wife with clothing. And in addition to just the necessary items that she needs to cover herself or protect herself from the elements, from the sun or from the cold, it also says that he needs to provide her with things like jewelry or cosmetics or perfume based on whatever the cultural norms are at the time, so that she feels good about that. We also see halachot that allow women to groom and to beautify themselves even when they are in mourning, when they're in avelut. And even though a lot of this is couched in the sense of in terms of what's good for the marital relationship, there are also sources like a Rashi that indicate that there's an understanding that self-presentation could be important for a woman woman's own dignity and for her own sense of self, not only about like how this will affect the people around her. And that's why we see sources like a Breita in Moed Katan that list typical cosmetics that were used by women, like you mentioned, not only on regular weekdays, but also even on Chol HaMoed, when maybe we would have expected there to be some more restrictions. And I take all of this and I take a step back and I say, if our sages already acknowledged centuries ago when makeup was less common, less ubiquitous,
apparently less safe also.
Yes, and less safe. And they already acknowledged that it was something that was significant and important for women, then it's okay for us to talk about it and not feel like somehow this is some kind of superficial conversation. It's something that is part of life, and it's all right to acknowledge that.
Totally. I think it's also important to note that even where we have so many places where the Torah and Tanakh highlights physical beauty or chen, which is kind of like an in-between, right? It's an interesting in-between word that we're constantly meant to ask what lies beneath it. And we have our quote from Mishlei that we say when we say the Eshet Chayil on Friday night, Sheker chen vehevel hayofi, that chen, sort of like this favor and beauty, there's something about it that's false. Now, again, I don't think it's meant to negate it, but it's meant to say it's not the whole picture.
Exactly.
And we also have one of my favorite quotes in the book of Shmuel. So it says about Shmuel anointing Shaul, that Hashem says to him, I'm telling you who's the right leader. Why is it my job, says God? כי לא אשר יראה האדם, כי אדם יראה לעיניים, והשם יראה ללבב. Right, that we see the external level of people, but I can see into people's hearts. Now, what I want to actually say about that is two things. One is that I want us to be careful in all of these conversations. Again, there's the makeup on Shabbat, but all conversations about how we look, which is that I want to be wary of binaries about physical and spiritual. Because as I said before, like the word chen, finding favor is a word that I love, because often it has to do with the fact that the character was physically attractive, but it was that they were physically attractive enough to allow it to be a portal into their personality to emerge, okay?
Exactly.
Because very often people have a beautiful personality, but the external presentation of them actually inhibits people's ability to access it, because we do see that as a first layer of humanity. And so when we say physical and spiritual, it's much more of a flow between both of these layers of our humanity. And that very often, again, how we look on the outside can be a help or a hindrance for people to be able to access, right? We could even just see when someone has even an external deformity, that part of what they feel isn't just that maybe they have an embarrassment, but that they know that when a person looks at them, they have to see past that to see what's inside. And so there's a much more dynamic relationship between all these different parts of ourselves. And I think that we intuit that, even if we don't always have
it's supposed to be much more integrated, what you're saying. By the way, this is reminding me of an episode that we once did for Matan, I think on Parshat Tetzaveh, about clothing and the way that clothing is supposed to be like a window into who we are. It's not supposed to be like the end all and be all, but it's supposed to be something that's integrated with our personality.
But that it's also really important.
Yeah, but that gives people like access. And I think that's what you're saying here about chen, that it's something more than just the physical.
Totally. And I guess one other piece that I want to mention before we go more into the halachik pieces, and I mentioned it briefly a little bit before, but I want to say it more broadly. I really think that there is something really important about Torah personality specifically, having an external appearance that complements the Torah that they're trying to bring to the world. I think that, as you said, there were trends, or there still are trends out there where, if someone is like a spiritual personality, then like that part doesn't matter. Of course, we also see the other extreme in other societies where there's insane emphasis, I would say, almost on the external wrappings or trappings having to be something that's almost perfected. But I will say that I really, really believe this, that when we are coming, whether it's a layperson or a teacher, but I would say especially a teacher or some sort of communal figure, I think that it's really important to be a representative of Torah, meaning if people see us or see those people as having that role, that I do want it to be like Deracheha, Noam, that we speak about that pasuk often, that the ways of the Torah are pleasant. I believe that it's also important that those who represent Torah also to be pleasant. And by the way, of course, we know that the standard is always held up higher for women for a whole host of reasons that we're not going to bring up here. But I also think it's really important for male Torah figures to also be presented presentable and put together,
Absolutely.
and like, I can go into examples, but I won't because it'll just come out like nitpicky and critical. But everything from the clothing we choose and from the way that we present ourselves, and I think that these things are really, really important, especially when people are coming to represent something that we think of so highly and that we want to be pleasant in the way that it meets people.
Yeah, and it's totally reflected in our sources, like the Rambam in Hilchot Zayot. He talks about that a Talmid Chacham, someone who learns Torah, is supposed to be in Malbush Na'ev V'Naki. He's supposed to be in clothing that is nice and that is clean. And someone may think, what? He's a Talmid Chacham. He's busy studying Torah all day. Like, shouldn't he be above, like, being concerned or worrying about his physical appearance? But as you said, like, we live in a concrete world, and we can never entirely separate the physical and the spiritual, nor are we meant to. They're supposed to, go hand in hand. And I think the goal that maybe should be on our minds is how could we integrate them in as good of a way as possible.
Okay, so with a deep breath, Shayna, we're going to go into
go.
the halachot, okay, that come up around applying makeup on Shabbat. Okay, now there are 39 melachot on Shabbat, categories of work. Again, work in a halachic sense. It's not the same thing as the work we think of in our regular lives, that were done with the construction of the Mishkan, and we derive from there all these different prohibitions, much more than 39, that we are not allowed to do on
39
Shabbat.
categories.
39 categories, exactly. And there seem to be 4 broad categories that could be transgressed when we put on makeup, okay? So number 1 is sovea. Sovea, which is a Torah level prohibition, is usually defined as an act of dyeing or coloring that serves to improve or beautify an object, right? Which of course could be us. The Shulchan Aruch, based on many Mishnayot and Gemarot, rule that as part of this melacha, it's prohibited for women to apply srak, which is blush, to her face on Shabbat. And also eyeliner, or to spread kind of like a paste on her face that reddens the skin when she removes it. Okay, it's a little bit different. There's a debate about whether applying makeup on Shabbat is a Torah level prohibition of tzovea, meaning tzovea is a Torah level prohibition. But the question is
does this count as that,
or is it a rabbinic one? Because many times we define tzovea, this dyeing, if it lasts for a long time, if it's durable. But of course, makeup's something that washes off, certainly the modern iterations of them.
Which means that if it doesn't last for so long, it would only be a rabbinic prohibition.
Right. Still problematic, but a rabbinic prohibition. So the Mishnah Berurah rules that applying makeup is a rabbinic prohibition because it's on the skin. And so it's not mitkayem for a long period of time, but it is mitkayem. It does exist for a certain period of time. Others, like Rav Avram Chaim Naeh, think that this is especially true because women will wash their face and the makeup is never typically there for more than a day.
I mean, they know when they put it on that they're not intending it to stay there for a long time.
Right, even if in theory it could last longer. So the majority of authorities, therefore, hold that applying makeup on Shabbat is a rabbinic violation of coloring because it's not mitkayem and it's on human skin and not on a material, right, or a cloth or something that it's like obviously the classic doraita way of dyeing. The second melacha that we have a question about is mimareach or mimachek, which is like smearing, right, or smoothing a solid. And on a Torah level, by the way, these are my favorite halachot to review because I find them so relevant. On a Torah level, this is prohibited when you kind of like spread like a wax that's really thick, okay? Like a thick wax or a wax-like substance. So maybe a thick lipstick would be an example like this. Again, we're asking maybe. On a rabbinic level, spreading thick oil or like a congealed fat is also something that's prohibited. And so some types of foundation would probably be an issue in this category. There's a range of opinions about when something is thick enough to be considered an issue of smoothing. Some halakhic authorities only permit applying liquids or products with the viscosity of oil or products that are diluted to that thinness. And others permit applying products that are pourable and flow by themselves, right? There's different customs in this matter. And then there's just 2 more melachot that are in question. One is kotev, which is writing, which is really only applicable to like an eyeliner.
Right.
And Rav Moshe Feinstein suggests that the melacha of tochen or grinding might be relevant if you would use like a brush to like scrape some sort of powder or like pick up the powder.
Right, like if the powder's very compact and then you're like trying to get know the pieces off of it, that could be an issue of
exactly.
tochen.
So those are the four issues that come up. Sovea, we have mimareach or mimachek, and we have kotev and maybe some sort of grinding. So those are where the questions sit. Anyone who wants to understand the more details about that and how we get exactly to rabbinic prohibitions, etc., really suggest looking at the Deracheha articles. They're very, very clear and so methodical. And so obviously we're going to talk now about how we can figure out how to go about being careful about these melachot, but maybe also having a space for makeup.
Yeah, because there's definitely a range of issues to be aware of, but it does not mean at all that there are no options for someone who feels that it's important for them to wear makeup on Shabbat. So the first option is that there's a lot of regular makeup today that's made to be quite long lasting that could be applied on Friday before Shabbat that will stay overnight and last, decently enough to the next day, especially if you're careful to sleep on your back or your side and your face isn't smushed into the pillows.
By the way, I do not know what this makeup is, Miss Wani. I've heard about this makeup for years as long-lasting makeup. I have no idea what it is. The only thing I've ever seen is like a lip stain.
Yeah, there's special Shabbos brands, I think, that are really long-lasting also. So it obviously won't look as perfect as when it's first applied, but I think there are women who feel, good enough about this, and it's definitely an appealing option for women who follow poskim such as Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and others who do not permit applying makeup on Shabbat at all itself. So those women may want to take advantage of this, even though there are other women who really don't like that idea of like not washing off your face before you go to sleep. So it doesn't sit well with them. For them, it could be that an option that they may want to explore is the option of tinting or permanent makeup. There are some women who really, really just don't feel comfortable ever being without makeup. Now, permanent makeup could raise its own set of halacha questions, and I honestly do not know so much about this option, but I do know that there are women who turn to it and who like that feeling of like always feeling like you have some makeup on.
Without any kesher to Shabbat.
Yeah, exactly. That's just something that they use and it's part of their lives. There are also definitely women who are not looking to use long-lasting or permanent makeup on Shabbat, but they do want something. Like they do want a little bit of something extra on Shabbat. They don't want to go out with absolutely nothing. So sometimes they'll use an oil or they'll use a halachically equivalent product that they use for skincare. And then like as a side benefit of that, they'll get that added shine that sometimes those products, allow for. And poskim seem to permit that across the board. Where there's more halachic debate is if somebody is putting on oil or she's putting on some kind of, clear lip gloss or something specifically for the purpose of the shine. There are some poskim who prohibit their use in that case, while others allow it as long as there's no other makeup on the face. So as in many areas of halacha, there's a range here of opinions and of different approaches.
Another option which has gained popularity over the last decade, I think even more, by the way, is what's known as Shabbat makeup. There are major authorities such as Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Ovadia Yosef and really important Ashkenazi and Sephardi poskim who felt that the use of translucent or colored powder that doesn't adhere to the skin and doesn't endure for a significant amount of time is not considered sovea, even on a rabbinic level, and is therefore permitted. And this approach has basically powered the entire industry of Shabbat makeup, which is made up of makeup that is all in loose powder form. It's often called like mineral makeup and contains no oils. So it's not considered coloring according to those rabbinic positions. The powder is thought to be like lightly sitting on the skin as opposed to really sticking to it and coloring it. And applying this powder is also not considered smearing or smoothing since it's so loose. There's really there's no issue of grinding like we mentioned earlier by Rav Moshe. You don't have to scrape the
right,
pot.
It's mamash powder.
It's mamash loose powder. So when it comes to Shabbat makeup, it's really important just to know that it's not enough to buy the right products, but you also have to know how to put it on correctly.
Right.
And so there's a few things to keep in mind. So one is that if you have a daily morning skin care routine of applying oil or moisturizer, we see that sicha or applying oil to the body is permitted as long as this moisturizer / oil is liquidy enough. Mm-hmm. By the way, this was big news for me. Big news, Shayna. I'm a much happier person in the past little while.
You're a big moisturizer.
I love moisturizer. Okay, so methods of applying the oil. They have to avoid the malacha of schita. I mean, you can't squeeze it out of a tube, so it can't be that. A lot of times those serum stuff would come in like a
spritz.
Like some sort of spritz or some sort of applicant like that. And so you apply it with your hands or like straight from the container, and then you basically can use a roller to put it on, or obviously your fingers. But you couldn't use like a soaked cloth or cotton ball. That would be an issue of schita. Mm-hmm. And once the oil's on the skin, it's permissible to use this you could use some sort of cloth to spread it, but not to put it on so that you're not saturating it. And if you want to apply this kind of oil or like a moisturizer and then makeup, what you do is you have to wait for it to be fully dried and absorbed, because we don't want to get into the issue of, well, it has oil and then you're using it to stick on your face.
Right,
So
and
you
that's
should do
longer
it like,
lasting, and then you
in
have the
theory,
Solvay issue.
earlier in the morning, right? Or there has to be some sort of weight between these parts. And so that it doesn't make the makeup last longer. And there's sort of a range of opinions and approaches to this topic, but it's best to talk them through with your halachik authority or someone that you trust to sort of get a sense of where you're holding in this, because there's different opinions about what this looks like. Another thing I'll just say is that before applying Shabbat makeup, you also need to make sure that your face is clean of any other not Shabbat products, because then you can run into these same issues again. So you can't really apply your Shabbat blush on top of your non-Shabbat cream foundation. So if you put on regular makeup on Friday night, it's really best to wash your face, use your soap, and to take off whatever is left from before, so that you wake up with a clean face, meaning clean of makeup in the morning. Another authority, let's say, for example, if Shlomo Zalman Auerbach expresses concern about removing makeup on Shabbat in order to replace it, but removing makeup on Shabbat is really widely considered permissible to do.
Yeah, we see that most people are okay with that.
Yeah, most people are okay with that as long as there's no issue of schita, right, or wringing out a washcloth or things like that. Another stipulation is that you can't apply one color on top of another color in order to cause them to blend. You can, though, reapply more Shabbat makeup right on top of it, as long as it's the same color.
Right.
So again, this goes into like, we don't want it to be Solvay, so we're like simplifying the process.
As you put on some blush in the morning and now you want to reapply, you could put it over what there was.
And a last piece is just that it's important to remember that you have to have basically different brushes, because the brushes you used during the week have the oil and all the residue and the things that we don't use on Shabbat. So you have to have, special brushes for Shabbat.
Your Shabbat makeup brushes. Yeah. I actually, because of all this talk around preparing for this episode, I actually recently went to purchase some of this Shabbat makeup. And I'll just say I had a lovely experience, like a lovely woman.
Shani, you left out the most important part.
Yes,
it was my influence.
Well, like after that moving away from makeup, like I spoke about, which is about a year ago, and I wasn't happy like with where I was in terms of how I looked, but I didn't do anything about it because I mistakenly thought that the only places that you could get Shabbat makeup is like in the Merkaz in Bnei Brak or whatever. That's what I'd heard. And then when you told me, what do you mean I got from someone in Gush Etzion? Literally that day, I texted her and I made an appointment, and I went and I got some of it. Now I will just say it's not cheap, because these mineral products are not cheap, and also having to buy the separate brushes like isn't cheap. But I decided this is my Hanukkah present. We do Hanukkah presents. Sorry, Fogo Rubel kids. In the Goldberg house, there's Hanukkah presents. But anyway, I basically came home with the bag and I said to Judah, here, you could gift this to me on Hanukkah and you don't have to go out and find any kinds of present, because it added up.
A very good tip for couples as a sidebar.
Yeah, get your own presents.
Either tell them what you want or buy it yourself and have them gifted to you with a big hug. Okay.
But I'll just add that one of the reasons that not everyone feels totally comfortable with the whole Shabbat makeup thing is because there is a little bit of a catch-22 here, which is that from a halachic perspective, the reason that Shabbat makeup is permissible is because we say it's not really going to stay for a long time. That's why it's not considered soveya. But at the same time, no one would go out and spend that kind of money on buying makeup that doesn't stay at least for a little while. So that's why there's some people that feel uncomfortable with this whole thing, which gets into a bigger issue that I think is really important to touch on here, because on the one hand, it's certainly simpler and easier to just like get up and say, no to all makeup on Shabbat, like halachically, it's very, I don't know, clean. It's very easy to say something like that. And on the other hand, I think that question of like, where does halacha meet us? Not only as women, also as men, all of us, like, where does it meet us in the way that's most respectful and that most sees us? And on the one hand, like, obviously is loyal and has integrity to the halacha, but on the other hand, also gives us room and sees us in terms of our needs, is something that is, I think, important, and that different poskim and different halachic authorities take different approaches to. They want to elaborate on a little bit. One approach is to say that when we have an issue like this that is so sensitive and so personal and so important, let's say in this specific example to women, if there's a way to say that something is okay halachically, then we should allow for that. We should make room for it, as you said before, right? The Torah is supposed to be a Torah that Deracheha Darchei Noam. That's what our whole site is called. It's a Torah whose ways are pleasant pleasant. And a Torah is supposed to be Torat Chaim. It's supposed to be something that is alive and that like is responsive to the needs of the people. So how wonderful it is when within the boundaries of Torah, within the boundaries of halacha, we could be sensitive to people's needs and say, hey, look, here's a way that we could accommodate that, like efshar gam v'gam. We could satisfy both things. We could be halachik and we could also allow you to do what feels right for you. And especially when there's a more pressing need, like someone who wants to cover up, a scar or something like that. And there's issues of kavod habriot, human dignity at play. So that's one side. But then there's a whole other line of thinking, which finds many of the leniencies around makeup to be super not ideal halachically. And there are concerns that maybe what's driving rabbis to take these lenient positions in the case of makeup is maybe it's coming from a patronizing place. Like, oh, we know those women and we know their needs and like we can't expect more from them. And it's coming maybe with a little bit of condescension, like we can't hold them to a higher standard that we would hold men to. And that's why some people like really don't like when they hear some of those more lenient approaches to makeup on Shabbat. I personally, I could really relate to both perspectives, and I'm happy that they both exist because I think that they really speak to the inherent tensions that are at play. Like when it comes to halacha in our day-to-day lives, like how do we have a halacha, a Torah that honors and gives room to our needs as humans, while also like adhering to the strict boundaries that we know are important. And it makes sense that there's going to be different approaches in different communities that fall in different places. And what's important is like trying to navigate that and think about the best way to move forward. As Ovdei Hashem, there's always going to be areas where we're going to have to bend our will to God's will, even when it's uncomfortable, right? All of us and anyone listening right now could think of those places where it's like, I wish it wasn't like that, but that's what it is. And this is what it means to be a committed Jew. And sometimes when we're able to stretch ourselves and commit, even when something is hard, there's something sometimes empowering in that and gives us strength in our Jewish practice and in our Jewish commitment. Like I personally experienced this a lot over the last 2 years in the war here, speaking to many wives of miluimnikim whose husbands were off at war and they're, in and out of Gaza and Lebanon. And sometimes they would come home or they would leave when the women were in Nida, and the questions of could you touch each other and give each other a hug and various approaches that poskim took to this. And there were definitely, different leniencies that were allowed to be relied on in these extenuating circumstances that were totally understandable for people to make use of. And at the same time, I found that there were some couples that decided that they wanted to be committed together to the regular standards that they always held by because they found that gave them strength. Like, hafuch al hafuch, like maybe the opposite of what people would think. Some couples, what gave them strength was that hug and knowing that the halacha makes room for that. And some couples, what gave them strength was like, no, we want to hold ourselves to what we always do, even though this isn't a simple time. And I think that even just thinking about these issues and navigating them is what's important here. And that I really, really, really am appreciative of the fact that there are poskim out there who are always looking to kind of make halacha relevant in our lives and to allow people to remain committed to halacha, because I think long-term, when people are keeping halacha from a place that they feel good about and they feel comfortable with and they feel happy and they don't feel like constrained or not seen, long-term, that's going to allow them to remain committed in a healthier, happier way a lot of times. So it's important for us as a community that we continue to explore these questions, even when sometimes people are like, no, why? Just say it's asur. It's always easier to say that something's forbidden and just rule it out than to navigate the complexities and nuances of these not simple issues.
I think another piece that's important in this area of question is, are people going to be doing it anyways? Which I think this is a very, very hard gzeirah for many, many women out there.
Right.
And so to sort of create a halachic rubric that enables it for those who anyways are going to do it. So let's now do it in a way that's halachically permissible, I think is also really important.
Right.
And this is not true about all areas of halacha. Let's just be real. Not all areas of halachic living are as difficult as others,
and are as personal.
Right? And we could put a whole bunch of different areas of law in this category, but certainly I think in this very small, kind of very private way, I think makeup can make its way into there. And as we said, makeup is something, or the way people present themselves, really, really digs deep into their humanity, into the way that they perceive themselves. And these things are very, very real, and I think that I'm so happy that the halacha has space for that. I will just say that there are dafka halacha communities, right? Or dafka religious communities out there that are, I would say now, but it's not a new thing, that their standard of how their community members are supposed to look, whether that's both in the way their face is made up or the way their clothing is supposed to look. This is not a topic of our conversation. It's sort of like an adjacent point to it. And many have spoken about it. And there's been, a podcast about it recently. It's exorbitant and it's insane. And it's influenced by many things that I think are not positive, not positive sources.
Also the money piece of it.
The money piece of it. Okay. It's a huge, huge aspect of it. So we're not really talking about that. I mean, we're speaking about that this is a very basic human need. We're not talking about something that's exorbitant or that someone has to have a face that looks flawless. We're talking about the way that women walk out and feel dignified about themselves.
Right.
And I think
you're coming back to that piece that we have to always think of the balance.
Yeah, and I think it's important that halacha has space for that. If someone wants to be all in and say, I don't even want to get into these rabbinic level questions, and it won't be enough for me just to put on that Shabbat makeup like that, so I'm not going to do it at all, that's a perfectly respectable route to go. But for someone who does want to find a way to go about it, then there definitely is a way.
Right, and that doesn't mean that, as you said now, it doesn't mean that we're encouraging, that everybody has to be made up and look, whatever. Not at all. We're just saying it's nice that halacha gives room. One other area that I think is important for us to discuss here, if we're talking about makeup on Shabbat, is when women have to go to the mikvah on Friday night or on a night of a chag, which is something that you and I, as you had said, halacha, are often talking to women about. We know that when a woman goes to the mikvah, typically she removes any kind of barrier between herself and the water, what's called a chatzitza, and typically makeup is removed prior to a woman immersing, even though someone may say that technically because a woman wants the makeup there and, it's there to beautify her, maybe it's not technically considered like a halachic barrier, but because it could get, ruined in the water, then that would be an issue. And also there is a very strong minhag for Ashkenazi women specifically to remove everything, like everything, even if it's not considered a technical halachic barrier before they immerse. So what happens here is that this raises the issue for women who are immersing on a Friday night or a chag. Some it's totally fine for them because they're not big users of makeup. So that, Shabbos, they won't have makeup on. But if you are immersing and then it's going to be really difficult to be without makeup on Shabbat, and there are women we know, right, that really feel that way. There are women sometimes who feel like they can't leave the house if they're not waking, they just don't feel comfortable with themselves. Yeah. So then it is important to know that there's different courses of action. Each one of them has their halachic advantages and disadvantages, and every woman and couple will have to figure out what's best for them. So I'm just going to review them very, very briefly. But one option is that you could see if you could go to the mikvah after the meal, like if it's important for you to be in mikvah as Shabbos starts, or you go to shul, or you have, a meal with your family or whatever. So then you could put the makeup on, and then you could remove the makeup before you immerse and go to the mikvah after the meal, even though usually the mikvah is open, after Shabbat starts. You could look into that and see if that's a possibility. And in many communities, they will open it after the meal for a woman who wants. There's a side debate about then when you eat, how careful to be, especially with things that could get easily stuck in your mouth, like in your teeth, like meat, but that's one option. Another option is that a woman could go to the mikvah and then apply Shabbat powder makeup after she immerses, even if that's not something that she typically does. There's the option of maybe immersing with long-lasting makeup that we know won't be damaged by the water, which we'd really have to try out before and make sure that that was true, but that could be an option. There also may be some room in cases like this to allow women to go to the mikvah right before Shabbat, which is sometimes an option that requires a specific psak if you're going to do that and has other important halachic requirements that you need to know about. The husband has to leave right away when you come home. But if a woman wants to do that and that could be a feasible option, then she could go immerse and then put on the makeup. And I'll just throw out one other thing, which is not necessarily something that is going to be, a thing that a couple wants to jump to right away, but it is important to know that it is an option, which is that a couple can together make a decision that they're going to postpone the tefillah till after Shabbat. Now, we don't love this as an option because we want couples to be permitted to each other, right? And we don't want them to spend a whole Shabbat asur when they could be mutar and they could be permitted. We want a woman to be able to go on time, but there's not a halachic obligation that a woman has to go on time if the couple decides together to push it off. So my job, I think, in this kind of situation, the way that I see it as a yoetz halacha, is to talk through with the woman like what she feels like is going to be the best option for her. And I found through that experience that a lot of times if you like talk it through, and this is like, the benefit of like a woman to woman conversation, because they're like, there's no way. And they're like, what about this? Or could this work? Or whatever. And like slowly it could be that an option that they hadn't thought about or didn't consider or didn't know was, even a possibility, all of a sudden becomes something that is doable. And again, like the more that we could connect women and couples and people to the halacha by allowing them to see that there are options where they could feel good about keeping the halacha and good about, what they're doing in their life, I think that is mevarach. That's something blessed that we want to be the case.
I mean, this isn't a mikveh episode, but I'll just say that there are many reasons that make Friday night mikveh complex for people, the technicalities of it, right? And the, if there's guests and all these different things that can happen, and makeup is certainly one of them, or creams, all these different topics. So I think that these suggestions you've made are probably going to be very eye-opening. I'm sure some of them are not known to everyone who's listening. So I really encourage anyone who this is a struggle for them to reach out to yoetz halacha and talk it through, because it's really important to make it feel right, you know what I'm saying? And to not necessarily push it off just because I can't do this, right?
Exactly.
Or there are a lot of solutions out there. I think I just wanted to mention one other halachic piece, which it's funny. I feel like it's even more relevant in my home right now than the makeup piece to a certain degree. But I want to just bring up hair products because they actually touch upon at least one of the melachot that we mentioned before. I'll just also say personally, I have a home with a bunch of young women with very curly hair. At this point, one of whom really cares about the curly hair, meaning there's a lot of hairstyling going on a regular basis in my home. And in the past year, I've really been trying to figure out how to have it done halachically and them actually listen. And it's a challenge. And this is something that I was also happy to sort of research a little bit more. And after I heard the episode, I gathered them all in the kitchen. I was like, okay, here's the deal.
Sit down.
There was a little bit of eye rolling, but there was also some acceptance. So we'll see where it goes. I mean, all you could do is share the information and then see what happens. So I'll just say that the main issues with hair products are mimareach, which we said was like a spreading, and squeezing. If the hair is wet, even though it's not so clear that there's such a thing as chita when it comes to hair, because hair doesn't really absorb liquid. Right. So that's a little bit of a different piece. Bonnet, which is like building something in the case of mousse or something or hair spray that makes your hair hard. If it shapes the curls, that could be an issue. And so I just wanted to throw out a few things here. But again, I really, really, really suggest checking out the website for the article on this. But I just wanted to throw out a few examples because I have definitely found them really, really helpful. So spraying something on the hair can be fine as long as it's not to make a hairdo, like an updo kind of thing. So hairspray that hardens the hair can be an issue, but all different kinds of sprays, or in Israel, I would say sarakal, or all these different kind of sprays that can kind of just smooth out the hair, or preserve it, that could really be totally fine. And products that just add shine are not as controversial. Apparently there's an item that was called Brilliantine, which makes the hair shiny, which was Shlomo Zalman permitted. I do not know if that is still on the market. Another thing is oil. Some people put oil on their hair, which is also permissible as long as it's not used so much that it would be squeezed out. But I just say from a hairstylist perspective, you probably don't want to put on that much oil on your hair.
Right.
So it's okay. One other piece also is that the one really helpful way to deal with mimareach is to dilute the product. So I mentioned this earlier when it came to face moisturizer or body moisturizer, which it basically does pretty good of a job, even if you do that. But you could do the same thing with hair cream or hair gel. Those are the fan favorites in my home. And you kind of just add water to it and make it kind of more liquidy. Apparently this works well. I asked a whole bunch of curly haired women out there and they said that this was done pretty well. Again, you just have to make sure to apply it kind of in the smoothing fashion and not really a bunching up the hair kind of to build up your curls. Apparently that helps at least with the frizz aspect. And as I said before, it also relates to creams that has to be able to be easily poured out. And it would be the same thing with like serums or rubs, that all these just need to be diluted, and it would basically be okay according to many, many opinions. But again, please see the articles, or if you want to feel more comfortable, ask your personal halachik authority.
Yeah. And the articles also touch on a couple of other issues that we're not addressing here, like perfume and things like that. So this isn't comprehensive in terms of all the different kinds of cosmetics and things that are out there. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Totally. And I think one other issue, Shayna, if like I could just sort of zoom out on this topic and think a little bit more philosophically, which is that another underlying issue that comes up with these things, and I'm not going to lie, I pretty much think about it every time I put on that very expensive Shabbat makeup that we now both own, which is this question about, does God care about the little details, or is this really how Judaism should be lived? And it's a really important question. It can come up in so many areas of life. Like this is just one that we're bringing up. But it's kind of like this little like rational voice. It's like this little mouse, inside of you that says like, is this right? Is this, in Hebrew we say, is this kavanat ha-meshorer? Like, was this the intention?
Right.
Exactly. And I think it's really important to recognize that. Like there are these moments where we're doing something because we want to preserve our tradition, we want to preserve halacha, but we kind of feel like it's bringing us to the edge of our rationality a little bit. And I think that it's a really important question.
Yeah, definitely people of like different generations, like we're in a very like tech-centered like generation right now, which like could open up all these halachik books or websites and like learn the details. But definitely for people who like religion was more something just like a way of life and something
and still
lived.
Is for so many.
Yes, exactly. And then like the nitpickiness of this sometimes like really begs that question of like, is this for real?
Exactly. And I think that, again, I would say also just as teachers, this is an important question that comes up often, right?
Of course.
And so I think that there are probably a whole bunch of approaches to how we could think about this. But I think that the first issue really is even how we perceive the halachic process, meaning the more we perceive the halachic process as something that's divine, meaning it's derived from a divinely inspired source or a completely divinely written source, the more we see the halacha as a direct outgrowth of that, I would say it's almost easier, right, to do the details because say, okay, well, God said those were the details. But the Rishonim themselves are totally in debate regarding how much of the halachic process, when it's refracted through generations of conversation, how much of this is a divinely derived piece of the Torah. And certainly we know that many of them are rabbinic principles, and we know that there are definitely human hands in them. So I think that it's important then to go a different route because it's a lot less about God needing this, right? God doesn't need me to put on Shabbat makeup, but I think that it's more about human need, right? We don't live just, by ideals alone. That's not how we function. It's nice to have an idea or a broad value, but what halacha does most of the time is to take that value and to quantify it in the world. So can we get lost? Can we lose the value for the details? Right. Sure. That's always the danger. That's always the risk. But we also need a certain degree of both. We need the value and we also need the practical tools of how we bring that into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has come up before on this podcast. And I think it really always helps me to think about the fact that every system of law comes down to the details. And many times in all kinds of systems of law, people may feel like, why do those details matter? And by the way, not just systems of law, in a game, in a board game, in a basketball game. It's like, why do those little rules matter? Why did they make it that way and not that way? And sometimes it could be that those little things don't have maybe inherent value, but they make up a system that does. And what it means is that like when you understand that that's how systems work, so then you realize that, that in the end of the day is what gives it meaning. So it could be, right, that we all understand the value of having traffic lights and stopping at a red light and not causing an accident. But then it's 3:00 in the morning and you're out on the road and there's no car in sight and you're like, why do I have to do this? Does it matter? Does anyone care? And yet, like, if a policeman goes by or there's a camera or whatever, you're still going to get that ticket because that's the system. Or if my kids, want me to make their lunch and they want me to prepare the sandwich this way and not that way, or to remove the crust, and you're like, why do you care? But they care. And I think like attention to detail at the end of the day is what really like is the bread and butter, so to speak, of our lives. And I think that, as you said, big values like holiness and meaning and love, they don't live in abstraction. They're bali de bitoy. They come to expression. They become real through the concrete, small, repeated actions that we do. And that could help us create either a relationship with law, right, with a system of law, or create a relationship with a person who says, no, like these details, like I want them, even if you don't understand them, or a relationship in this case with God. It's not just about what we believe or what makes sense to us or what we feel. It's also at the end of the day about how we act. It's also about the little decisions that we make. And I think that's what makes Judaism, at the end of the day, a lived religion and not just a philosophy. That's why sometimes when people are like, ooh, I love Shabbat, I love the concept of it, but then their Shabbat doesn't end up looking the same as somebody who's keeping these little details. We know that because these small acts are what help us create and forge our identity as committed Jews, and they anchor those core values. They bring them down into our day-to-day life.
Totally.
Okay. Wow. Covered a lot here. What's your takeaway?
So I really love this episode. I was initially really scared, by the way. But I was happy that it gave me an opportunity to think about the way this topic intersects with really deep truths about who we are, what we think is important, how we present ourselves. I think that the tension between Shabbat, you mentioned in the beginning, Shabbat being a day where we are dressed up and want to respect it, but sometimes feeling not put together. Mm-hmm. By the way, it sounds silly, but with my kids and their really curly hair, it's a real thing. Yeah. It's been, and I, now I'm trying to figure out how to go about it.
These things are real.
They're real. You know what I'm saying? So that piece and being able to think about it and figure out where there's space in halacha for this is really significant. And I think I mentioned already, but I'm really, really happy about being able to water down moisturizer because that was a very hard gzeira for me for many years. And I was very happy to learn about that. What about you, Shana?
So I'll share honestly that my nature is to be someone who's more focused on the big picture. Okay, I like to get things done, and I like to get things done quickly. This goes back to the patience piece that we said at the beginning. I don't always have patience to hone in on the little details. For better, for worse, that's my personality. In our marriage, for sure, we've learned how to navigate that because my husband's the opposite extreme, and he's a very detailed, nuanced person. I like to move quickly, and it's hard for me to slow down sometimes and to give something the time that it really needs and that it really deserves in order to get something exactly right. It requires real effort on my part. It's very not natural for me. So when it comes to halacha, I really do try. I do my best to live my life that way and to make the best decisions that I can. But when you spoke a little bit ago about that little voice that's does that really matter? Whatever, that is a real voice for me. Mm-hmm. I contend with that voice because little details to me don't matter as much as getting something done. I'd rather get it done at 95% or even 90% than taking way more time to get all the little details right and it be 100%. I just feel that bogs people down, and then okay, it was 100%, but it took months or whatever. So I know that voice, and when I struggle with it, it's not from a lack of belief. It's from this is something that is a piece of my personality that I know I have to work with. And there's that gap sometimes between what we know cognitively matters and still what doesn't feel natural for us. So I needed this episode. It was really hard for me, the preparing and the attentiveness to the level of the detail that's needed here. But I'm walking away with chizuk. It did something for me personally. And I want to applaud all the women out there who really go the extra mile when it comes to makeup on Shabbat to make sure that they're getting all the details right. Or a woman who's going to listen to this episode and say, wow, that's a detail that maybe I didn't know about or wasn't careful about, and now I'm going to try to get that right. It may not seem like the biggest deal to people on the outside, but we know how truly significant it is. And I think that that's something very special and something that's worth noting. So I'm taking that with me forward.
Shana, before we say goodbye, I just want to let all of our listeners know that we are now going to be releasing an episode every 3 weeks. They're going to continue coming out on a Wednesday morning here in Israel time, but it's going to be every 3 weeks. So we're really looking forward to our next episode. And I loved having the opportunity to prepare this one with you. Until next time.
See you next time.
Did this conversation move you or cause you to think about the topic in a new way? Please share these episodes with friends and family and start conversations about meaningful mitzvah observance. Make sure to check out the show notes for links on how this topic is discussed on Deracheha.org. Contact us with thoughts and questions at womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. Looking forward to our next conversation.